I should comment, this is not ready for prime time, not ready for general consumption.
This is just some data
on
some device.
Something. This is just some chart, okay?
Hey everyone, so I am back with Tom Peterson from Intel. We did a video recently on some of the Arc GPUs. So we got into talking about as high level as the names of the products and then went down to some architecture.
Oh yeah.
And now we're back to talk less specifically about the Arc GPU hardware and more. We're going to start with some discussion on frame time pacing. So this can be applied to any vendor, any GPU, any gaming. It's the consistency of delivery of your frames.
Yeah, it's just how are the frames showing up on the screen, right?
Right, and we're going to be getting into some of the details of what in each of these bars is a representation in milliseconds of one frame, how long it functionally took to get to the screen. We're going to be breaking down with Tom's help what is actually happening inside of that bar.
It's pretty cool.
Other than just a frame happens.
Yeah.
Before that, this video is brought to you by the Thermaltake Tower 100. Thermaltake's Tower 100 is a mini ITX case to serve as a showcase system for your components. The Tower 100 has received many revisions since we first saw it, and the case now has an open vent in the bottom for intake, a mesh cutout in the side panel for some GPU ventilation, and additional mesh along the side skirts and the side panels of the case. The Tower 100 is mostly focused on building a showpiece PC that's small enough to fit on most tables. Learn more at the link in the description below. I guess we could talk about the shortcomings of this presentation.
Yeah.
I could say that as my review.
I think it's a great chart, okay? And what is it talking about? It's saying, well, you know, a frame starts at 0 and then it ends up at some time, in this case 6 milliseconds, and you know that, okay, I'm getting a frame every 6 milliseconds.
Right.
But what you're not seeing is anything about, well, what's happening? Am I busy on my CPU? Am I busy on my GPU? Why is it 6 milliseconds?
This talk, I think, will help people understand the question, too, that we always get of, Steve, I have a, I don't know, an i7 and a 3060, am I bottlenecking? The answer is basically always yes.
Yeah, you're always bottlenecking.
You're always bottlenecking. Something is starved. It's just what is it?
Exactly, and it can change, right? It's dynamic based on the scene, or maybe your settings, or maybe
application,
temperature. It could be anything, right?
Right, and so in terms of, I guess, let's do a really brief reminder of why this data is important. I'm going to let you take over this, as opposed to just average FPS. So we show average FPS, we extrapolate a 1% low, a 0.1% low, which is basically like a, sort of an easier to consume version of this.
Yeah.
But all of that stuff still has the same flaw of you're missing some context.
You are.
And so what we use that to look for is basically, okay, do we now need to deep dive into one of these?
I think we should. I think we should.
So Tom, I'm going to let you explain why this kind of data is helpful and the story it tells
Okay,
us.
so the first reason that this is helpful, way above average frame rate, I think average frame rate's important, just like you do, because it's an easy way to understand what's the rough experience.
Right.
But these little charts will tell you, like in this moment right here with the blue one, you're going to experience a hitch or a stutter because the animation that's embedded in this frame is actually going to be showing you the wrong value. So the CPU calculated a time and it put that in the motion, but then there was some delay before it got on the screen. Now this is telling you that, but you wouldn't know that by looking at an average.
Especially you get some of these. And
yeah, I
we've
mean,
had
this is
spikes.
double, right?
Yeah, and so on the more extreme end, I believe this chart's showing an unstable overclock, I think is what the blue line is. And on the more extreme end, you'll see some products we've reviewed in the past where, whether it's driver, hardware, whatever, you might have a spike, say, to like 150 milliseconds.
It could be easily 150 milliseconds.
Right, and you saw that a lot in the early days with like multi-GPU.
Oh, shit. So, my AMD brothers will remember that one.
Yes.
Yeah. So the way I think about this is it's the next level of understanding about experience, right? And the idea is smoother's better than choppy, and each one of these stutter lines excites your sort of deep mammalian brain that you're looking for things to move quickly, because that's exactly what a stutter is, right? It's something that jumps very quickly from one spot to another.
Yeah, except in this case, it's not actually intended to be played.
It's not supposed to. Yeah, exactly. It's supposed to be smooth. Yeah.
The jumps you're looking for are normally going to be in-game things, obviously.
Totally. Now the order of magnitude here is 3 milliseconds, and some people say that's not big, but it turns out that you can see 3 milliseconds. I've done a bunch of studies. It seems like really sensitive first-person Twitch people are around 3 to 5 milliseconds.
Wow, okay, yeah.
Like people that are really casual gamers get jarred by about 20 milliseconds, and everybody sees like 30 milliseconds and above.
I remember when when actually from in the background here, PC Per and Tech Report were talking about frame time pacing really early on.
Yeah.
And I remember some of the early postulation was sort of like 8 to 12 millisecond deviation. You start to get more likely to notice.
Oh, for sure. Now we know that, depending on the gamer, and it's very correlated to age. So you'll see younger people are more sensitive to smaller variations.
Right, that makes sense. So this is still missing some context, though, which is interesting because we just talked about how this provides all the
a lot more context, right? Yeah.
Which is where you get into really, as a reviewer or on your end on product development, you get into this challenge of you have to start asking, what is it I'm actually looking for? Like, you could keep going, but at some point, it either gets difficult to present to people, or you just get buried in a bunch of BS that doesn't matter.
Exactly.
In this case, we're at sort of that point where we've got good data here, but there's more to have.
There is. So I've been now I should comment. This is not ready for prime time. Not ready for general consumption.
This is just some data.
Just some
device.
Something. This is just some chart. Okay. Now the way to read this chart is exactly like your chart. The top of this line is that frame time chart. So each one of these bars is a frame. Okay, now what's cool about this chart is that I'm not showing just the duration, which is what a frame time chart would be. I'm actually showing what's happening using a little bit more information that's available in Windows. And the one piece of information I can look at is, when did the CPU start work on this frame? Right? And so that's what the bottom edge of this beige box is when did the CPU start work? And I can look at this little kind of thing that's called in present. That's when the CPU said, I'm done with all my setups. I ran like my physics loop. I did all my CPU render. I sent all the work. It's all bundled up. And it says, GPU, please start doing what you're going to do, right?
Yeah.
So in this black bar, that's the GPU where it's actually running its shader program, right? I told you a little about XE Core. This is where the shader program has been given to the GPU, and it's like doing these wide vector arithmetic, calculating pixel colors.
So I guess to define the lines, we've got let's see, the blue line at the top here, that's queued for display. So this is, it's done.
It's done, it's waiting for its chance to be put on the screen.
Right. What triggers that chance to go on the screen?
Depending on the mode, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but if you have VSync on, it would be waiting for a VSync interval.
Okay.
If you had G-Sync, it might flip away, but it sometimes would wait because G-Sync is busy, or Adaptive Sync or G-Sync is busy scanning out a prior frame.
Right.
So there's lots of reasons why it doesn't flip immediately.
Sure, and then for the orange bar on here, you have that as in present. Can you define that?
In present is when the application, the game, has finished all of its work, and it's like, here's my bundle of render calls I want you to execute on the GPU, go.
Right, okay.
So everything down here you can think of as CPU work, and the GPU is not busy, and then the GPU here is busy. Now, this is a little bit complicated because obviously there's a lot of things happening in parallel here, where while we're working on one frame, we'll actually start the next frame. So
is that where the negative number comes from?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so negative means that this one frame here is overlapped with the prior frame.
Okay, so basically this frame is kind of in flight.
Yep, this frame's doing its thing, and when it got to this point, it started on the next one.
Got it.
Basically, the present gates the CPU from beginning on the next frame.
Okay.
So if you measured that amount, it should be close to that amount.
A little bit of parallelism here.
Yeah.
And then, and to answer the bottlenecking question, this is it. This is how you would objectively look at it if you wanted to get into it and you had a tool like this and you're not waiting for a reviewer to do it for some reason.
Well, yeah, it's totally right. I mean, we could. I mean, again, we're not yet. But we could do a tool that would like tell you in real time what's this number and what's that number.
Right. And we've seen this in some games too, where they'll bake it into the engine or something. Doom does this.
Yeah, it's very cool.
CPU time, GPU time.
That's cool.
And so that would be anyone who wants, okay, what do I take away from this video? What you take away is you can look at tools that give you that, and you know, oh, okay, the CPU is sitting here at 14 milliseconds, and the GPU is at 6.
Yeah, and what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that, well, for one, you can turn up your settings. Right, because your GPU is basically idle, you're CPU heavy, so maybe it would be a better experience to balance it more towards the GPU. Right. Another way is you've got these giant GPU bars, and your CPU's doing nothing. Maybe you turn
like
down
over
settings.
Here, maybe.
Yeah. Well, this is also another whole we have another whole video we need to do on what's going on over there. But I suspect that's a texture loading.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to ask is, what's actually happening inside of these bars. So we talk about the CPU's working on it, the GPU's working on it. Okay, great.
What does that mean?
Right.
Yeah, so let's start with the CPU part,
Sure.
right? What happens inside a game is there's this thing called a game loop, and every frame goes through the same loop, and what you have to do is you have to say, okay, what time is it? Like where I am right now, that's the start. And using that time, you have to do a couple things. First, you have to run a physics simulation. And the physics simulation's using the CPU. It's like mass, velocity, acceleration of everything in your scene.
Right.
So that takes a while. And then after that, you're going to do things like get network interfaces, you're going to get user input, and you're going to adjust your geometry so that that's the new scene you're trying to draw. And then you have to take all of that position information and convert it into DirectX calls. Right? Because you're taking what's a scene description and converting it into graphics instructions. That's all done on the CPU side. So by the time all that's where you could say, right here it's like maybe physics, and then maybe this is like network, and maybe this is CPU render.
I'm guessing like game logic or AI would be happening in here somewhere.
It would
as well.
all be happening.
Okay.
Well, AI, if it's accelerated on the GPU, would be a separate pass on the GPU.
Right.
So when you get to this gray stuff, that's where you're sending commands to the GPU, and they're parallelizing everything, and they're executing these SIMDs instructions, generating pixels.
In the GPU line, what kind of stuff is happening there? I guess stuff like Z occlusion as you're filtering through through
You're doing some culling.
Right.
You're doing geometry processing. So every frame starts off the same way, basic same recipe. I mean, there's more complex engines, but you first have to get a sense of where are all my triangles. So you're going to convert sort of a scene description to something that's very specific to your camera position, which is the image you're trying to draw.
Right.
And all of that is done separately. So the GPU has to figure out which triangles do I see.
Right.
And then the next step is what color is the pixel that is hitting that triangle.
Can I save on bandwidth somewhere by doing like delta color?
And should I get rid of these triangles because even though they're in the scene, they're not important because there's something in front of it, all that kind of stuff.
Right, cool. So what's next?
So the reason this is important is because of all this sync stuff.
This is a big dive.
It is, but
I
again,
guess that's because the GPU
exactly,
is...
and this is actually happening in parallel.
Right.
So what's really happening is something happened here.
Right.
And this guy is waiting for this guy to finish.
And we won't get into it too much right now, but your theory is something like texture.
It could be.
Yeah,
could
okay,
be.
sure.
All right, so the reason I brought this up is because in ARC GPUs, we have some cool new technology that kind of takes advantage of some of the things happening in that pipeline, right? Adaptive sync, of course, is supported by us. That's the industry standard for variable refresh. You know I'm very passionate about that.
Yeah.
And then speed sync is a new thing that we're doing. Basically, speed sync allows us to get lower latency without having any tearing.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Is this a technical term?
No cap.
Okay.
No capping.
Yeah.
No frame cap.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a tech.
So not no cap like the never mind.
There's no cap.
Okay.
And there's no login. And
Not
there's
that, no cap.
Not a cap.
No cap. All
So
right.
this is actually what's brand new. So people have not seen smooth sync.
Okay.
What do you think?
So I think it's very interesting. I think so. Have you talked about either? Well, this we know about. Have you talked about speed sync yet?
I've talked about it, but not in depth. Right. Speed sync is all about how do we get lowest latency without tearing. You'd normally say to get rid of tearing, I turn VSync on. But most gamers know that if you turn VSync on, you're going to get really low frame rates.
Yeah.
And the game engine slows down. I mean, you've tried this.
Yes. Yeah. You also set yourself up for. It's the question of what do you want more, right? Do you want hitches and stutters, or do you want tears?
Right.
Those are the historical reason that things like adaptive sync have come into play, is to try and eliminate the choice.
Yeah.
And so yes, this I'm familiar with. So speed up the latest frame. Can we? What exactly?
So the idea here is we want gamers to get the experience of very low latency gaming without tearing. And the way to do it in this technology is render really fast. Like if you're playing CSGO, get 200, get 300 frames per second. But if we show those on the screen, it's kind of a torn up mess, as you know. Like you're spinning the thing around, it's like a million. It looks like, it doesn't look great.
Yeah.
So instead of that,
you see the frames
like
starting
strips,
to split.
like little, it's split all over.
And the worse it is, the more strips you'll see.
Yeah, and the higher your frame rate, the worse it looks, right? Which is kind of a weird thing.
Right.
So what this does, it says, Well, we want the game engine to keep running that fast, but we don't want to show all those torn strips. We're just going to show good frames.
Let me ask you, from a game input perspective, we've had this conversation in the past, but so if you're talking about, so I might choose to have extreme tearing at a higher frame rate because I feel like the input is better.
Yes.
Is that an argument that...
That is a real thing. That is a very real thing, and I understand why gamers do that.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, I've seen some gamers with great rigs that like make their game window like this, and they're running at 500 or 600 frames a second, and that's better for them, right? Right. So everybody's got different...
Especially if you're actually competing in esports.
Yeah, I totally get it. So this is kind of a nice middle ground. What it does, it says, from the game's perspective, we're going to be running really, really fast, but from a user's perspective, we're not going to show them all those torn frames. We're just going to pick the latest one. Right? And what that means is you get it, no tearing, but the latency is still very good.
Okay.
Yeah, now why people haven't always done that is not clear, but we're doing it now.
Is it, I mean, it seems like G-Sync and Adaptive Sync both, it took decades of dealing with the problem before anyone tried to address it. So it might just be that it kind of took a while to figure out that it is a problem.
It does.
Right?
All these things are obvious when you see it in hindsight.
Right.
And it just takes years to have these ideas, I think. Now, smooth sync is another one. When I describe it to you, you're going to think, oh, come on. You know, we should have done that a while ago.
Yes.
So this comes from a guy, Gary Smith, and his team, our software architect.
Intel, I guess.
He's on Intel software architect, and really smart guy, Gary. Good job.
Good job, Gary. I don't know what you did yet, but
yeah, good job. No, I'm telling you, it was a good job. So what this does is it can't get rid of tearing, and we don't want to turn VSync on. So we're just going to make tearing less jarring. And the way you make tearing less jarring is instead of having all the strips, just blend. And by just blending, somehow that takes the jarringness down a notch or two, right?
Let's see it.
All right, let's see it, okay.
Let's see it.
So here is smooth sync in action.
Yes.
So the idea is, and this goes back to that picture we started with, this is the first frame that's being rendered on the GPU, and with VSync off, it just goes right onto the display. Now, while we're in the process of scanning that frame out, a new frame gets rendered by the GPU, right? And so what we do on hardware today with VSync off is we just start scanning that new frame as soon as it's done. And that's why in this picture, this is the new image and this is the old image, and that's that tear line.
Right.
Now it's the same image on the right-hand side, but we're using smooth sync. And now what smooth sync does is it's sort of blending the top image into the bottom image, and that tearing line is much less.
Right.
So it's a pretty cool technology.
Yes. So I don't know if it's in your video demo, but we were talking about how you might have 4 frames getting drawn in one sort of actual capture of the screen.
Yes.
In total. Actually, it was in here somewhere.
Yeah.
And let's I guess if you want to do like...
We just walk through it a little
frame
bit.
by?
Yeah, we'll kind of maybe do both. So this is a program called Virtual Dub, and we captured 2 pretty close copies of the same game. And this is both VSync off. Smooth sync is on this side. Smooth sync is off. So I'm just going to step it until we get to a good example.
Sure.
And then we'll...
So smooth sync's goal, is it functionally interpolating what should the ideal colors be in this region where the tear is happening?
Yeah, smooth sync is trying to say, I want to make, like here, let's just look here. In this frame, there are 3 tears, right? There's a tear line here, and there's a tear here.
Yeah.
Right? And what that means is this is frame 1, this is frame 2, and this is frame 3. Over here, let's try to figure out where the tears are. Okay.
So there was a huge one here on that side, obviously.
Okay, I don't know if it's
so
let's look down. There's a tear here.
Yeah.
So you see this pixel stuff?
Oh yeah.
And you see how there's a little bit of ghosting here?
Some like dithering type stuff.
Yeah, so that's what the tear looks like when you apply a smooth sync.
Right.
And then down here, there's another one.
Yeah,
so you see kind of like this line here. In this case, the tear line's here. Since it's not totally 100% in sync, the tear line's down there.
Right.
But you see how it's sort of softer, right? If we go forward, let's see if we can see another one. Here's a good one, right? So here's the tear line here, right? You can see the character, and there's another one down here, and that looks like a flicker when you're looking at it. So over here, we've got this sort of blended thing, and we've got a blended thing there, and it's just generally softer. So maybe if I just play it, I don't know if it's going to show up. I'll give you the video.
Well, yeah, definitely let's play it. I think in real time, I have a feeling those dither marks will be I can see it a little bit, but I'm literally staring
Yeah,
for it.
Like
so.
when I look at this guy,
Yeah.
I see the tearing. Like it's
Yeah.
just very obvious. Over here, it's just much softer. You still see something. It's not like
Yeah, I think you get into it gets into the subjective side where it's like, so you can still see something. It's a question of, is that something less noticeable in live play?
Right, which do you like better?
Right.
And I think people are going to try it out, and some are going to like it, some are going to hate it.
Right.
Almost every technology I've ever been involved with, there are some people that like it, and some people like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
Right. If you remember when G-Sync first came out, there was, until you saw it live, you couldn't really get it. But
I mean,
now,
so I saw it live at CES for the first time, I remember. And for adaptive sync technologies, it really didn't mean anything until you saw it.
Yeah,
I mean, it doesn't. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
like, what do you do? You're going to play it through a screen
that doesn't have the technology.
or
Yeah,
so.
yeah. But this, I think, is similar, where people are going to have to try it. I'm sure you'll do some videos. We'll put some videos up there. It's a very cool technology.
Yeah, I think you can see it in action, but I think the maybe if I were going to argue on your side of things, I think the argument I would make is that blurring, especially in this particular game, or the dithering, whatever you want to call it, the pixelated stuff that appears over here, is minimized enough where it starts to look like it's just part of the game.
Maybe.
In a way. So I think I could see it when I'm literally staring for it. Right?
Yeah.
But in live play,
I think different games some are going to be better, some are going to be worse. I think anything that's a first-person shooter, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
If it's like a tops-down kind of scroller thing, maybe less good, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's also less likely to even be needed in that scenario, because then you could V-sync it if you don't really care.
Yep.
Yeah. But for an FPS, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so this is, again, just one example of the type of tech we're doing at Intel. I think you'll see more and more of this kind of stuff, as you know. I'm very passionate about this stuff, and I think it's a great way for us to give gamers a better experience.
So for where this works, requires an ARC device or?
ARC GPU.
Okay, so it'll require an ARC GPU. And then, is it all games?
All games.
Okay. So it's the developer doesn't have to bake it in.
Developers know anything about this. That's the best tech. Not that I don't love developers. Let me clarify. I love all developers. I love everything about developers.
Right.
Okay, but this doesn't need developer support.
Right.
No.
I mean, it is. It's easier to roll out that way.
Yes.
So there's a lot less friction.
No kidding.
Cool. So is the intent to launch this with ARC GPUs, or is this later?
No, it's available right now.
Cool. If you have a card.
If you have a card.
Yeah. Yes, which we just got some, so we'll be doing testing.
Yeah,
soon.
you ought to try it out. I'm curious what you think. I like the idea. Working on different dither patterns, like there might be some patterns that are.
Yeah, I see one right here.
Yeah. So like, do you do a blend or do you dither? I mean, there's lots of different ways to do this. Yeah.
Is it basically just focus grouped at that point? Like you just.
Right now, it's just a couple of engineers sitting down doing what they think is right.
Right.
We don't focus group stuff.
Yeah. So for stuff like this, then I guess the
direct feedback.
The feedback, for Intel would be post a comment
yes.
As soon as you try
Please
it
do.
out.
Please do. Yeah.
Do you have any slides you want to go through? Or is
no,
that
that's it.
Okay, cool. So that is a recap of the no cap. Smooth sync.
You're going to have to tell me what that is.
We'll talk about it after. It's not bad. It's okay.
All right.
and thank you, Tom, for joining me.
It's good to see you.
We'll see you all next time. All right.
What's no cap?